Welcome to another episode of the RobinsonHewitt pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what it will mean to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson Consulting. Welcome. So I went to see a film last week on a Thursday afternoon, just me with my big box of popcorn and my favorite bag of blue M&Ms. And I walk out of the film feeling something that was a little bit different. And if you know me, you know that I'm a regular when it comes to going to the cinema and actually sitting down to be in person and watching a film. But this time it wasn't necessarily the score or the dialogue or even a particular scene that captivated me. It was more like feeling seen by the film itself. Like someone had made a very specific film for a very specific type of person, and I was part of that cohort. And if you're a listener of this podcast, you might be too. So the film was Disclosure Day, and I know that there has been a lot of discourse online about the plot holes, the pacing, the parts that tend to drag. And if you were hoping for something that was alien heavy, I totally understand that critique. But for those of us who work in this corner of building the future, people who think not just about where technology is going, but about what it means to be human within that and how intelligence itself is evolving, I think it kind of said something else, especially if you've had ideas that have been following you since childhood. And I think there were actually two films that were playing in sequence. And, one told the intended story about Disclosure Day and what that would look like, this idea of hidden information about other forms of intelligence coming to light, things previously unseen becoming visible. And then another film running underneath that, where a certain type of person might feel understood, where experiences, puzzle pieces, half-formed theories have been placed together in a way that says that you're on the right track. And the world outside the cinema was doing its own thing at the same time. There has been a pattern to the news cycle lately, which has been escalating tensions, and a lot of things have been coming to a head globally all at once. And that backdrop was mirrored within the film, because at its core, Disclosure Day is partially about what happens when hidden things become visible. And that is a very specific kind of story for a very specific moment in history. But before we get into all of it, I want to preface that this episode might not make sense to everybody today, and that's okay. It may hit a chord that rings in your mind a little bit later on. So I encourage you to listen with an open mind, take note at what jumps out at you, and know that there's still time to switch tracks if you need to. And what I want to talk about today came directly out of sitting in the cinema, because Disclosure Day, underneath everything else it is doing, is about partnerships and connections between two souls. It's about the person full of empathy who can see humanity clearly, who feels like a symbol of hope, and the person who can speak the language of universal structures, of math and logic, and translate it into something real. And also about what becomes possible when those two things finally meet. And that is something that I've been circling in my mind for many years through my research on founders and at the work we do at RobinsonHewitt Consulting. And of course, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I will have absolutely no spoilers in this episode. This is just talking about the future of partnerships, relationships, and co-founders. So let's look at the current state of play when it comes to the idea of partnerships and collaborations when it comes to building the future. So in the world of building right now, especially in technology, there has been this dominant story about where ideas come from. And we all know the stories of the lone genius or the two college students in the garage who later have a falling out, or the brilliant founder who could see things that nobody else could see. And I understand why those stories persist. It was a very satisfying one in the era where you could simply just have a great idea and build out a SaaS product and become a millionaire overnight. But truly genius ideas, and the ones that we flirt with here at RHC, are never really born out of nowhere. They come out of experience, some collisions, and two very different types of intelligence meeting exactly at the right moment. And I think that we're entering a period where the story of the lone genius is starting to break down, because the problems that we are trying to build solutions for are too complex, too layered, perhaps too human for any single model of intelligence to hold on its own. And the challenges that matter most right now are the ones that involve AI and society and what it means to remain human within accelerating change. And those require something more than just solo brilliance. They require partnerships between people who think in different ways. And there is a new form of partnership that I've been thinking about for a very long time, one that keeps showing up across history and across industries, and that Disclosure Day actually put back in front of me in a way that I just simply couldn't ignore for a podcast episode. And now it's a different type of relationship I think some of us have been looking for but never knew existed. And as always, if we want to take a look into the future, we have to take a little look back in time to notice the patterns. And this one is my favorite of any story of history, or her story. So let's go all the way back to 1815 and meet Ada Lovelace. And if you work in the world in technology, you of course know of Ada as the visionary who laid the foundation for the first computer program. But what I find more interesting than just the achievement itself is the kind of mind that she had and what her partnership with Charles Babbage can actually teach us about how to build the next era of technology. So Ada was born in 1815 and she was the estranged daughter of the poet Lord Byron. Her mother was incredibly worried that Ada might inherit what she described as her father's emotional and mental challenges, encouraged her towards maths and science from a very young age. Being an aristocratic woman in the 19th century England, that was not the expected path. As a child, she would actually take what she learnt, using her mind and a form of meditation to use her understanding of math to accurately build functioning and mechanical butterfly wings, which I just think is such a beautiful way of blending her imagination and her love of math and logic. And there's another very famous inventor who used the same methods, but I will leave him for another episode that relates to connections, but in a different energetic kind. And a note, a lot of that is how we actually invent things here at RHC as well. And the thing I love about Ada is that she could move between worlds, between poetry and proof, between imagination and logic, between what exists and what could exist. And the thing that her mother feared the most, this emotional, imaginative, almost visionary quality, turned out to be the most important thing about her. And so later in her life, Ada came into collaboration with Charles Babbage around his design for what he called the analytical engine, which we now recognize as the blueprint for the general purpose programmable computer that we know of today. So this analytical engine had a mill, which we call the processors today, a store for memory, and a system for input and output of information. So Babbage had actually been funded for a different type of engine called the difference machine, but he saw beyond it as well, and he could imagine something larger. And then Ada came in. Ada was originally asked to actually translate a paper about Babbage's work from French into English. And what she returned was actually not quite a translation. It was so much more than that, as the notes that she had annotated in the margins and other pages were actually longer than the paper itself. And what she wrote and annotated were her imaginings of what the potential of what he had invented. And in doing so, she wrote the first algorithm ever intended for a machine. But more than that, she actually wrote something that has always kind of stayed with me. The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns, just as a Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. So what she's describing here is not just a calculator. She was describing a full creative system. She saw, more than a century before it even existed, that machines one day might compose music, generate art, model complex systems. She saw what technology could become before anyone had the infrastructure to even build it. But I don't think Ada by herself could have built the analytical engine. And Babbage, as brilliant as he was with engineering and logic and translating ideas into mechanisms, I don't think he ever saw what Ada could see. He needed her imagination to understand the full reach of what he was actually constructing. And she needed his ability to turn the vision into something structurally real. But the funding for the analytical engine never came, and it was never completed. Ada ended up dying quite young, and her ideas sat in notebooks for decades, treated as curiosities rather than the strategic foresight they actually were. And she said herself, which I think about a lot, and she said, "That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show." And she was right, and she knew it. And she also knew that nobody around her fully understood what she was doing and what might be possible if the ideas had been taken seriously, if the partnerships and work had been properly resourced, if imagination had been given the same weight as engineering. We will never know, but we get to choose differently now. So now let me see what my futuristic insights are telling me about the future of co-founders and collaboration when it comes to building the future. So I have a theory that I've been developing that started with Ada and Charles and was so beautifully acknowledged within Disclosure Day as well. So I believe that there are two kinds of people involved in building the future. There is the builder, the person that I also call the translator. This is the person that speaks the language of systems, logic, structure, and math, who can take an idea and translate it into architecture, who knows how to make something real from what someone else has seen. And then there's the other, person who I don't have a word for other than the visionary or the navigator, the person that is deeply empathetic, who can feel into what is unseen and get glimpses of potential outcomes, who understands patterns across people and history and can intuit where something is going before the data even confirms it. And a few hundred years ago, that would have maybe led towards being burned at the stake. So let's acknowledge that there is an upgrade there. And Ada and Babbage were one version of this. And I believe Spielberg and Williams are another, the director and the composer. So the person that holds the vision whole and the person who translates the emotional truth into another form entirely. And I love that Disclosure Day was their 30th project together, Steven Spielberg and John Williams, because I believe that half of the magic of all the movies that we love by Spielberg is directly because of how Williams can translate the feelings of the movies into sound. Something as simple as two notes, an E and an F, can make you shift in your seat, wondering if the shark will bite. And I believe that this is a partnership model of the future of technology as well. A union of two different modes of intelligence that, when they come together, produce something that neither could be produced by themselves. And when they come together, it's magic. And there's a reason why I believe that this is important to think about if you are building or work in technology, especially with AI. We know that AI is built from the past. It is trained on what has already happened, what has already been said and thought and created. And that makes it really great at synthesizing and optimizing and accelerating existing patterns, but it cannot generate new ideas. It cannot feel into what has never existed. It cannot imagine a future without any precedent. And this is why I believe that comes from people, specifically people who have developed the capacity to move beyond the obvious, to work with imagination and pattern recognition and a kind of empathetic intelligence that doesn't have a clean job title yet. So if we want to build the future that is actually new rather than just a faster version of what has already existed, then we need both, the builders and the deeply empathetic, in actual partnership together. And there's a broader implication here too, because if we are moving towards a world where we encounter new forms of intelligence and technology, or even potentially beyond to our ET counterparts, the most important preparation is not going to be technical, but more relational. To have the capacity to approach the unknown with openness rather than control, to meet something unfamiliar with curiosity rather than aggression. And history is pretty clear on what those two approaches could produce, and the outcomes are not equivalent. So we touch on this on our first episode, actually, where we discussed building ethical AGI. If you're curious about that, I would actually go back and listen, but please be warned, it was my first episode and I was still going through evolutions of how I was doing this. Be warned. So there is one more thing I do want to pull here from the press tour from Disclosure Day, which has been so fun to watch. Josh O'Connor, who plays the main character Daniel, he talks about a moment where he was struggling to find what his character needed emotionally for a particular scene. So he had been texting Spielberg, and later that night, he actually wrote back, "The door is on the latch, just push." And O'Connor took that as a very profound piece of direction. The emotion was built up, the door was just resting closed, and all he needed to do was push to let it all pour out. And it completely unlocked the scene for him. He thanked Spielberg on set the next day, and Spielberg laughed and said that the message was not intended for him at all. It was an instruction he had meant to send to his wife, who was coming home late and forgotten her key. And alongside the obvious reading of that story, what I took from it is something about how carefully we need to hold meaning to things. Because part of the skill of working with intuition and imagination, professionally or personally, is knowing when something is significant and when it is actually just so simple. So with someone who works with the future, I am very deliberate about not declaring outcomes as fixed. A glimpse of a potential is exactly that, a potential. Every decision you make opens a new door, and every new door changes what comes next. So the work is to never announce what will happen. It is to help people move towards what they are building with more clarity and with fewer blind spots. But also, I think the message itself is worth keeping, because the door being on the latch, not locked, not stuck, just resting closed, and all you need to do is push it open. That is something a lot of us need to hear right now. We don't need a key. We don't need to be let in. We can open the door ourselves. So practically, how do we move towards a future where we can find our co-founder? So I see three stages of this, and I want to be clear that there is no linear type of framework with a clean beginning and end to this. It is more like a sequence of work that keeps deepening over time. And the first with all of this is finding balance with yourself. And I call this work becoming whole, of learning to hold your professional and personal selves without splitting them totally apart. And I like to follow the same pattern I do with these podcasts. So that means going back into your own history, into your memories, the things that shaped how you see the world and what you believe is possible. And this is all about deconditioning yourself, deprogramming the things that aren't you, and learning what is actually yours to hold. So understanding what has held you back, where your assumptions come from, and what you actually want and who you are rather than who you were told to be. So this is the foundational work. And for those building in technology specifically, it is most consistently skipped staged and probably the most costly one to skip, because without it, everything built on top is unstable and the partnerships you form will reflect that instability. And once that's in progress, you move to the second stage, which is about finding the right collaborator. And the right partnership is not always the most obvious one. And it doesn't have to last forever. Some collaborations are for a project or a phase or a season, but the ones that are genuinely matched, like Spielberg and Williams, where both people are doing the inner work, where the values are aligned, where one can see and the other can build, those are becoming something else entirely. But if a partnership is not growing, if the other person is not willing to do the work that collaboration requires, you cannot force it. And protecting the work sometimes means stepping back from something that is not moving. And the third stage is what becomes possible when you two are in place. When you have done the work on yourself and found the right collaborator, you build something bigger than just the both of you. And what gets built from that foundation is different in quality than what gets built without it. But for individuals, the most useful first step is getting honest about which side of this you naturally sit on. Are you the builder or the visionary, the translator or the navigator? Most people have elements of both, but there is usually a stronger pull in one direction. And knowing that tells you a lot about what you are looking for in collaboration, and we are likely to get stuck working alone. The second thing is to take your intuition seriously as a professional capacity. It's not a supplement of data, but is a skill that can be developed and evidenced. I always say you are the expert in your idea, so lean on that. Pay attention to what you notice. Write it all down. Watch what turns out to be accurate over time. Start building your own body of evidence for how your particular intelligence works. For those building specifically in the tech space, the most important shift right now is from thinking in a solo perspective to a more collaborative one. And not just adding people to a project, but deliberately looking for people that are complementary to your intelligence. If you are a builder, look for someone who can see the system as a whole, who can feel into where it's going and why it matters to people and to your own story as well. So if you're a navigator or a visionary, look for someone who can translate your vision into structure without flattening it. And if you don't have a translator or builder just yet, do as much of the groundwork now as you possibly can. So write things up, map out what you're seeing clearly as possible with the tools available. All the tools are in your hands right now, and they're very useful. Use them to supplement your knowledge while you're still looking. And when you are assessing potential partnerships, the question is not whether someone is talented or well connected. It is whether your values match, because work built on mismatched values will never hold. So our final notes for today. If you understand that this episode has been pointing at, it may be time to start looking for new energy, new relationships, new collaborators, and people that fit the vision of what you are trying to build. And if something does not fit the vision, it is a no. But you also have one resource that tends to get overlooked, which is all the versions of yourself that you have ever been. Let them come to you. They have ideas and memories and ways of seeing that this current version of you might not have reached yet on its own. So consult with them and consult with your future self too. Literally ask yourself, what could I do today that would make my life easier when it's all done? How would I move through the world? What does my routine look like? It's not as strange as it sounds. It's just a different type of partnership and thinking about how can my future self be my best friend today? So let's reflect back on this episode. Ada never saw her ideas realized. The analytical engine wasn't built. And for a long time, her contribution to the tech world was treated as a footnote in someone else's story. But the foundation that she laid, and this insistence that imagination is as essential to invention as logic, that vision and engineering need each other, became the ground for everything since that has been built on. And I think about that in relation to this podcast. Some of what moves through here will make sense immediately, but some of it will take time. Some is for very specific people at very specific moments, and I'm at peace with that. And the right ideas will find the right people at the right time. So partnerships, co-founders, and the nature of collaboration, I could talk about this for days, and I don't even think I of touched on our connection to the earth, to animals, to ancestral knowledge, and to some more esoteric forms of guidance that I find very fascinating. And maybe that's for another episode or for more behind the scenes conversations. But what I do know is that even with artificial intelligence accelerating everything, and perhaps especially because of it, now is the time to think more carefully about how we connect as humans so that collectively we can meet whatever new form of intelligence is coming next with empathy, compassion, and an open mind. Because no man is an island, and the future is also not a solo project. So if today's episode got you thinking, you can come and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our inspirations and thoughts for founders and future-facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and future systems thinking, helping future-facing leaders, founders, and organizations transform, evolve, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, we have a lot of free resources available on our website to help you on your own founder's journey. But if you're ready to take the leap, you can find our services as well. Everything is linked below, and make sure to subscribe to next week's episode to help build a better future for everybody. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao.